before the throne of God above.
I One, two, three. Now I'm on. Okay. Well, it's been 4 weeks since I've last taught this class, and it feels like it's been forever. And I'm glad to be back. Well, if I can get this on. There we go. We're going to be covering a lot of material this evening, Job 22 through 27, so we're going to be running through. There will be some time for discussion. I've got a question basically to start off. One of the things I want you to remember is we're reading Job. Let's look at it as dramatic literature. We've already hit the turning point there in chapter 19, and now we're basically seeing falling action. And we're moving quickly to my very favorite part of the book of Job, chapters 29 through 31, which is called the Lamentation of Job. We'll be looking at that next week. The three things I want you to remember as you read Job: God in the way that he works in the world is what is on trial here. It's the earthly trial of Job is just an extension of God's trial. God is infinitely wise. God is sovereign. And really what's on trial here is the belief, and during Job's time, everyone had this belief that God worked in the world through the retribution principle. If you lived righteously, you would be blessed. If you were wicked, you would be cursed. And this is basically what we're going to do this evening. We're going to take a look at Eliphaz, then Job replies, then Bildad has 6 short verses in there, and Job 25, and then Job replies again. And basically, I like the way that you did this 2 weeks ago, where you gave the synopsis first, and then basically you went into it. Eliphaz, his message hasn't changed. Basically, his message all along has been, you must have sinned greatly because you're suffering greatly. So what you need to do is repent and you'll be restored. And, Job is discombobulated. He bought into it as well, the retribution principle, and thought that's how the way things worked. And now things are out of sync. And he basically says, who can think about self when the world is so out of sync? He's trying to figure out, okay, if the retribution principle isn't the way that God works in the world, what is? And actually, I didn't want to get there yet. So one of the questions I want to ask is, why did Job feel that the world was so out of sync?
Because he felt like he did everything that God had wanted him to
Mm-hmm.
do. And then he lost it all. And he can't understand, if I was doing everything right, why am I now suffering?
Right. So basically, he believed in, one of the authors that I read this past week called it cash register justice. As long as I keep handing over righteous acts, as long as I maintain being righteous, then God would continue giving me stuff as well. And all of a sudden, he's been giving the righteous acts, but now he's suffering. And like I said, he's discombobulated. He's really struggling to understand what's going on. When what you think is right, or the right way to do something, and all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore, think about how you feel. When you've been doing the same thing over and over and over again, and been getting the same result, and then all of a sudden you no longer get that result. And one of the things that we're going to notice about Eliphaz and Bildad is some of the tactics that they use. When a person feels like they're losing an argument, they usually change their tactics. What do? They attack the person instead of the problem. They might start calling names. They may insult the person. They may use sarcasm. But basically, that they don't really address the argument. They try to make the argument the person's character or integrity. Well, Eliphaz is going to use this tactic. And we're going to see it in his speech. Now, if you ever watch one of the presidential debates or any political debate, usually, the handlers of the politician, and every politician has their handlers, gives them, okay, here's your talking points. Here's the things that you're strong on. Here's the things that you want to push during this debate. And often you'll see, their competitor has a different set of talking points, a different set of strengths, and they may say something about, I'm really strong on the economy, and then expect their competitor to address the same issue of the economy, and that person may plunge on, said, but I've got a strong record in criminal prosecution. They'll completely ignore the points that their opponent has been arguing and press their own agenda. And we're going to see that Bildad uses this same tactic. He ignores Job's argument, and he plunges on with the same argument that he basically has maintained all along. Okay. So let's go ahead into chapter 22 and let's talk about Eliphaz. Then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, can a man be profitable to God? Surely he who is wise is profitable to himself. Is there any pleasure to the Almighty if you are in the right? Or is it gain to him if you make your ways blameless? Is it for your fear of him that he reproves you and enters into judgment with you? Basically, Eliphaz is saying, God doesn't need man's wisdom. And your claim, and he's talking to Job, your claim to fear God is countered by your suffering, which he believes is God's reproof and judgment. You know, basically Eliphaz is stating that I believe that God would not make the righteous suffer. You know, and Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar, they're introduced as Job's friends. They come there, they seem very compassionate, they sit there in silence for 7 days, and they suffer a lot. You know, it seems like they're empathizing with Job. But because of their background, because of what they believe, the only thing they can think of is, you know, great suffering. Well, he must have sinned greatly. And they can't get past that. They can't show Job the empathy that he needs. And now we see Eliphaz resorting to name calling. Is not your evil abundant? There is no end to your iniquities. For you have exacted pledges of your brothers for nothing, and stripped the naked of their clothing. You have given no water to the weary to drink, and you have withheld bread from the hungry. You have sent widows away empty, and the arms of the fatherless you have crushed. So Eliphaz doesn't refute Job's claim to innocence, because really he can't name one sin. So now he's thrown out general accusations, hoping that, you know, you throw stuff at the wall, you keep throwing mud at somebody, well, maybe some of it will stick. And that's what Eliphaz is doing right now. You know, he calls Job downright evil, saying that Job exacts profit and returns nothing, basically what we would call extortion. And he continues with this. Therefore snares are all around you, and sudden terror overwhelms you, or darkness so that you cannot see, and a flood of water covers you. Is not God high in the heavens? See the highest stars, how lofty they are. You know, again, God would, you know, Eliphaz believes that God would only put snares around those who are wicked. And he would only induce terror in those who have sinned. Will you keep to the old way that wicked men have trod? They were snatched away before their time. Their foundation was washed away. They said to God, depart from us. And what can the Almighty do to us? Yet, and now you see a little change in Eliphaz. Yet he filled their houses with good things, but the counsel of the wicked is far from me. Finally, Eliphaz takes a turn and he acknowledges that God blesses the wicked as well as the righteous. Now, for him, that's a stretch. And so it shows that Eliphaz, you know, Job is struggling with his suffering. You know, he's gone from one of the mightiest men of the East to the trash heap. He's struggling with that, but now we see Eliphaz struggling too. He's trying to figure this all out. You know, he knows Job's past. He knows that Job is a man of innocence. But the only way that he can understand Job's suffering is thinking that he must have sinned in some way. But he's changing slowly. You know, where do we find biblical proof that God blesses both the wicked and the just?
He sends the rain, and Jesus talked about that on the Sermon on the Mount. He sends the rain to the just and the unjust. He also, you know, causes the sun to rise.
Yeah.
Every day. People who are sinful still have crops that grow and they prosper. And also people who are righteous do the same thing.
So Ken went to the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 5. And if you will, turn with me to chapter 5, beginning in verse 43. Chapter 5, Matthew, beginning in verse 43. Showing that God gives rain to the just and unjust. And I think that's the King James Version that uses that language. Beginning in 43. You've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who's in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. Now I think about the parable of the wheat and the tares, where the workmen come in and say, do you want us to pull the weeds now? And the farmer says, no, let them grow. And so you got the wheat, a profitable crop. You got the weeds, an unprofitable crop. And the sun shining on both, the rains on both. And then it comes down to basically what we would equate to the judgment day, to the day of the harvest, where they're finally separated. Agree with God and be at peace. Thereby good will come to you. Receive instruction from his mouth and lay upon his words in your heart. If you return to the Almighty, you will be built up. If you remove injustice far from your tents, if you lay gold in the dust and gold of Ophir among the stones of the torrent bed, then the Almighty will be your gold and your precious silver. For then you will delight yourself in the Almighty and lift up your face to God. And we're going to see, Job has already said that I will see my Redeemer. I will see God. Back in 19. And in 42, we're going to see it again. Lift up your face to God. You will make your prayer to him, and he will hear you, and you will pay your vows. You will decide on the matter, and it will be established for you, and light will shine on your ways. So it's interesting to me, we look at Job's life, one of the mighty men of the East, blameless, above reproof. We know he's innocent. We've got the background, the knowledge. And basically Eliphaz is exhorting him to agree with God. Well, he's been agreeing with God all along. To me, that kind of says, folks, you almost have to walk in somebody's shoes before you can say something to them like Eliphaz has. He doesn't understand the situation. He's not lived in Job's shoes. And he just continues to open his mouth and basically show how little he knows. But he says that Job will be restored. Why does he believe that Job will be restored? Somebody say something here? Well, when you're living under the retribution principle and you're a sane and sensible person, one who can reason, and you're suffering, what conclusion are you going to come to?
If I don't quit what I'm doing, or if I do quit what I'm doing, this will stop.
Okay, I need to turn. I need to repent. I need to stop sinning, turn to God, and I'll be restored. And I think that Eliphaz, when he looks at restoration, he just doesn't look at restoration as your relationship with God, but he's also looking at restoration in wealth, restoration of influence, with the community. He's looking at all of that being restored. Before we look at Job, I have a friend, Jan Ross, and last week Jan lost her second husband in 3 years. Now, she worked at Temper Sealy as a legal secretary and came home one day and her husband had been out mowing the lawn and he had a heart attack. So less than 3 years ago, she lost him. About a year, 18 months later, she met a gentleman, and they fell in love, and they got married. And Denny died this past week, Denny Ross. So, and right now, she is suffering. She's grieving. And she's trying to understand. She's discombobulated. That's the word for the day. Her world is turned upside down. She thought she was going to spend many years with Denny, and now he's gone. And I want to read something from C.S. Lewis. If you've never read his book, A Grief Observed, it's basically C.S. Lewis. His wife has just passed away from cancer, and he's struggling to understand. And he's reaching out to God, and he's reaching out to God, and he's reaching out to God, and he's looking for comfort. And to him, it seems like God is silent. So I want you to just listen to what C.S. Lewis has to say. Meanwhile, where is God? This is one of the most disquieting symptoms. When you are happy, so happy that you have no sense of needing Him, so happy that you are tempted to feel His claims upon you as an interruption, if you remember yourself and turn to Him with gratitude and praise, you will be, or so it feels, welcomed with open arms. But go to Him when your need is desperate, when all other help is vain. And what do you find? A door slammed in your face, and a sound of bolting and double bolting on the inside. After that, silence. You may as well turn away. The longer you wait, the more emphatic the silence will become. What does this mean? Why is He so present a commander in our time of prosperity, and so very absent a help in time of trouble? Now, this is a man who is deeply grieving. And he's emphatic in his prayers to God. And to him, he feels like all he's hearing is silence. Have you ever grieved in that way? I know that, let me see, it would have been in 1993. I was preaching at a little church called Chinkapin up near Batesville, Arkansas. We would go up for the weekends. We would stay with Glenn and Betty Hibbets. And Sarah was pregnant. And we were as happy as could be. And we were out in the garden helping Glenn and Betty. And all of a sudden, Sarah started bleeding. And later that night, she miscarried. And she grieved. She grieved deeply right off the bat. And as a man, I didn't handle grief very well. I was silent. And about a year later, I was in a preaching class in Memphis. I was there for a week. And we were learning how to preach from the wisdom literature. And Dr. Bland happened to be, he's one of the the greatest experts about preaching from the book of Job. And he took us through chapters 29 through 31, the lamentation of Job, and it hit me. And I started to grieve. You know, a whole year later, people grieve differently, but it's still grief. How do we handle, how do we minister to people that are grieving that deeply? Which is the right way? Somebody who denies it for a year and then it hits them, or the person who deals with it right off the bat? Is there a right way?
There's a right way. It's just not always the right moment, and it all depends on who they are and where they are. It's how you deal with grief.
Okay. So there's a right way, but there's not always a right moment. So, maybe for Sarah, the right moment was in the present, and for me, I might have needed the right people to be around me, the right text. Yes, sir.
Maybe your delay in grief was, how can I say this real quick? She's in grief now. She needed your support.
Yeah.
You didn't have time to grieve along with her at the same time, so it might have been a benefit.
Yeah.
To grieve later, etc., so you could support one another.
And I do remember thinking I need to be strong for her. I need to support her. But that's the kind of grief that Job is facing. That deep grief that it seems like you're not ever going to overcome. Then Job answered and said, "Today also my complaint is bitter. My hand is heavy on account of my groaning. All that I know where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat, I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know what he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he contend with me in the greatest of his power? No, he would pay attention to me. There an upright man could argue with him, and I would be acquitted forever by my judge. Behold, I go forward, but he is not there, and backward, but I do not perceive him." I would be acquitted forever by my judge. Job believes, he truly believes that if God would only listen to him, if he could lay his case before God, that he would be vindicated. He maintains his innocence. He maintains his integrity. But he can't find God to set his case before him. On the left hand, when he is working, I do not behold him. He turns to the right hand, but I do not see him. But he knows the way that I take. When he has tried me, he's sure that when God tries him, I shall come out as gold. So he's maintaining his innocence. My foot has held fast to his steps. I have kept his way and have not turned aside. I have not departed from the commandment of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my portion of food. So again, he maintains his innocence. When he has tried me, and he believes it'll happen, I shall come out as gold. But he is unchangeable, and who can turn him back? What he desires, that he does. Basically, he's acknowledging God is sovereign. What he desires, that he does. For he will complete what he appoints for me. So now we see a little bit of a turning. He's starting to think, well, maybe this is a test. And he's saying, well, until God has completed the test, then it won't be over. And many such things are in his mind. Therefore I am terrified at his presence. When I consider, I am in dread of him. God has made my heart faint. The Almighty has terrified me. So God's not going to stop, and he believes it is God that's doing this to him. God's not going to stop until the test is completed. Yet God prolongs the life of the mighty by his power. They rise up when they despair of life. He gives them security, and they are supported, and his eyes are upon their ways. They are exalted a little while, and then are gone. They are brought low and gathered up like others. They are cut off like the heads of grains. If it is not so, and now he's laying out a challenge to his three friends, if it is not so, who will prove me a liar and show that there's nothing in what I say? So we've gone through, this is the seventh discourse. You know, Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, and now Eliphaz again. So this is number 7. And you guys have been along for the ride. Have any of them yet proven Job to be a liar? I think the answer would have to emphatically be no. You know, they've kept throwing mud to see what would stick, and nothing stuck. None of them have proven him to be a liar. None of them show that there is nothing in what he says. You know, he maintains his innocence, and they have done nothing to prove otherwise. Okay, I'm doing pretty well on time. So now we got Bildad. And Bildad basically has always looked back toward tradition. And when I hear the word tradition, I don't know how many people have seen the musical Fiddler on the Roof, the song Tradition. That's what comes to mind to me. And I want to sing out, tradition, but I'm not going to do that to you. So basically, Bildad says, face the fact that tradition knows best. And Job says, God's immense power has brought order to the cosmos. Everything around me is orderly. And the one thing that I thought was orderly, the retribution principle, all of a sudden that's been flopped on his head. Especially in my life. I am God's victim, and you will be too. Here I stand with only my righteousness to cling to. And that's how it is when you think you know how the world works, and all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore. You maintain a righteous life. You know, for Job, he's maintained a righteous life. He's been blameless, beyond reproof. He's the greatest man in the East. And all of a sudden, God doesn't bless him anymore. He curses him. And now he's not sure about how the world works. So here's Bildad, and he only has 6 short verses. Then Bildad the Shuhite answered and said, Dominion and fear are with God. He makes peace in his high heaven. Is there any number to his armies? Upon whom does his light not arise? How then can a man be in the right before God? How can he who is born of woman be pure? Behold, even the moon is not bright, and the stars are not pure in his eyes. How much less man who is a maggot, and a son of man who is a worm. So, basically, Job has thrown out the challenge and said, prove me to be a liar. And Bildad just scoots right past it. He's not going to address that. He's not going to address anything that Job has said in his response to Eliphaz. He's going to go right forward with tradition. And basically all along he's basically said to say it in the words of a child, God's so big, we're so little. God is holy, we are not. So, you could boil down Bildad's speeches throughout this to basically those words. He looks at man as a maggot, a worm, and when we're so low, when we're just like a worm or a maggot, how can we ever be right with God? He just continues pressing that point, doesn't address anything that Job has said. So he had 6 verses. That's a pretty small part to play in this third discourse. Job's reply. Then Job answered and said, how you have helped him who has no power, how you have saved the arm that has no strength, how you have counseled him who has no wisdom, and plentifully declared sound knowledge, with whose help have you uttered words, and whose breath has come out from you. The dead tremble under the waters, and their inhabitants, Sheol, is naked before God, and Abaddon has no covering. He stretches out the north over the void, and hangs the earth on nothing. He binds up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not split open under them. So now Job is making some assertions about creation. Now, if you've read through Job before, in a little while, God is going to come out, a voice from a whirlwind in chapter 38, and he's going to start asking Job some questions about creation. But here, Job is giving forth some assertions about creation. He covers the face of the full moon and spreads over it his cloud. He has inscribed a circle on the face of the waters, at the boundary between light and darkness. The pillars of heaven tremble and are astounded at his rebuke. By his power he stilled the sea. By his winds the heavens were made fair. His hand pierced the fleeing serpent. Behold, these are but outskirts of his ways, and how small a whisper do we hear of him? But the thunder of his power, who can understand? Let me take a look at 38 here. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, then basically asked a series of questions that Job doesn't really know the answers to. And we'll get to that in the by and by. Now, Job is asserting that we only know the barest minimum of God's power. So he's acknowledging what Bildad has said, that God is so big and we are so little. And we can only know just the tiniest bit of what God knows. And Job is still struggling to try to understand his situation, but he acknowledges that even if God told him what his situation was, what was going on, that he would still only understand just a little bit. Bible says that God's ways are higher than man's ways. And Job continues. And Job again took up his discourse and said, as God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty who has made my soul bitter, as long as my breath is in me, and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak falsehood, my tongue will not utter deceit. Far be it from me to say that you are right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. I hold fast my righteousness and will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days. So again, if there's one thought that you can think about Job throughout this book, throughout this drama, is that Job maintains his innocence. He maintains his integrity. And that's probably why he's struggling so much with his suffering. So next week's class, chapter 28 is a wisdom hymn. So if you remember, I think the first two chapters are prose, and 3 through, I believe, 41 is poetry. So, it's dramatic literature, it's dramatic poetry. Well, we're going to see a hymn of wisdom, or a hymn to wisdom, in chapter 28. And then we're going to get to, this is the section that I've been waiting all quarter to finally get to. My favorite chapters of the book, what's known as the Lamentation of Job, Job 29 through 31. And basically, if you want a synopsis of each chapter, in 29, he's looking back at the past, and he wishes that what was in the past was still what was happening in the present. Then he laments the way that he's being treated in the present. And then in 31, he continues to maintain his innocence to God. I'm not guilty. Judge me so that I can be found blameless. He maintains that if God would only hear his case, that he would be vindicated. Any comments or questions? Did I hear somebody back there? John.
Say some of the comments that Job made in chapter 26 as a creationist, when you read it quickly, you just kind of go over it, but I mean, it is rather intense.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at it, because he hangs the earth on nothing. Well, there's no way Job would understand what he's talking about there, but
Yeah.
the earth is suspended in space, hanging on absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's talking about.
Definitely inspired.
Yeah, and other, he says the clouds hold, or dark clouds hold water, and just the principles of, science and things like
Mm-hmm.
that are just kind of sprinkled
Yeah.
in these words. Even he covers the face of the ground, he spreads out, drew a circular horizon on the face of water. Well, for the longest time, flat Earth,
Mm-hmm.
Mary's calling, the Earth circular in a way. He described it even further.
Yeah.
I think in Isaiah he calls it a sphere, but in here he calls horizon circular, which again would puzzle many people. But you've got scientific information just within a few verses here that are sprinkled. If you're not, you could catch it and look at that and say, wow.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me in 26, he makes those assertions about creation. And then a little further, I think in 27, he basically says, we can know so little of what God knows. And it's kind of like it's being set up for chapter 38, where God's going to ask him those questions that he doesn't know the answer to. So it's all leading up, to that. We're all moving toward chapter 42, where we can see the change in relationship between Job and God. Any other comments, any other questions? We got a minute. Well, folks, I'm going to let...
The guys that you've looked at, has anybody given any kind of a time frame of from the time this calamity started until the end of the book? What kind of time frame that was?
Yeah, nobody really has asserted that. You know, they've made guesses as to when this was written. They believe that Job was a contemporary to Abraham, but that's basically the only places in time that they've put this. But nobody said, well, this lasted a year, or this lasted 3 months, or, you know, to me, he's been suffering for a long time. You know, all this happened very quickly, and who knows how long he's been suffering. We know that his friends sat there for a week. And how quickly they went through their discourses, we don't know. So, thank you, folks. I appreciate your comments, your questions, your responses. Have a great week. Next week, chapters 28 through 31.